We begin this hour in KZN because voting at the ANC's eThekwini Regional Conference is meant to begin at this hour after provincial leadership had to suspend the election process due to an impasse over who should be allowed to participate. Delegates of both the Thabani, Nyawose and Zandile Gumede factions remained locked in a fierce debate for hours over whether or not the regional task team delegates should be allowed to vote. The conference was then pushed to this morning, whilst the provincial leadership and NEC deployees to KZN tried to resolve the matters. Now, let's give you this. The ANC's KZN spokesperson, Nhlangani has explained the reasons behind this deadlock. Take a listen.
Key amongst the challenges were around the credentials. More than anything on the credential was the status of the regional task team. Some of the delegates felt that the regional task team should have a right to vote. And they also were outlining that the Women's League as a structure has long expired, so it should not be having voting status. So those were the issues which were a point of contention among the delegates. It took us for about 5 or 6 hours without conclusion. Hence we ended up agreeing that no, let us adjourn for the day. We'll then convene tomorrow morning, having consulted with the leadership of the province officials and the national officials, because part of the presupposition is that in other provinces outside of KZN, the RTTs have voting powers. So why is it in the KZN that we don't have such?
Let's get to the latest on the ground now. There you can see our senior politics reporter, Ziyanda Ngcobo, who's live to us from inside the Inkosi Albert Luthuli ICC. And Ziyanda, it appears it's another instance of hurry up and wait. Any signs of the conference beginning anytime soon?
Certainly not. As predicted, Ayanda, that 9 o'clock would not be the start of the resumption, I should say, of this conference, as you would have heard Nhlangani saying it would. You'll know that in the early hours of this morning is when those delegates left at around 5 o'clock after that deadlock over who should be allowed to vote. Basically, this boils down to a matter of principle, and Thabani Nyawose's side is saying that, a national decision was taken that regional task teams are allowed to participate as voting delegates at conferences, but here in KwaZulu-Natal, the provincial leadership, they claim, has set a bad precedent at other conferences such as Lower South Coast and in the far north, where they denied RTT members their right to vote. And so they're saying that the steering committee that is overseeing this conference is going to have to come back to them and give them feedback on what should take place. That steering committee has, national leaders such as Njabulo Nzuza, Lindiwe Sisulu, to name a few, who you would have seen have attended this particular conference. They were sent to go and confer with the national officials, including the president, the deputy president, the national chair, as well as the treasurer, about how to move past this impasse. Zandile Gumede's side is saying that, well, no, the RTT members should not be allowed to participate after a resolution was taken specifically here in KwaZulu-Natal not to do so. They would obviously be prejudiced and disadvantaged, Ayanda, if, RTT members are allowed to vote, because at least 3 people from that 13-member RTT have been affected by the step-aside guidelines. So when you look at the numbers, which it would seem would likely be neck and neck, they would be disadvantaged then by this resolution. So we're yet to hear then from the NEC officials who've been deployed to this province, as well as the provincial leadership, as to how they're going to move past this impasse. But I tell you what, I've spoken to both sides, and both of them are very clear that they're not about to negotiate their slate. They are all saying they are still going to stick to their slate, and they're rejecting any kind of proposals to sort of reach some kind of negotiation. So this issue of who should be allowed to vote is where we stand at this particular point in time.
Very quickly, we do know that the conference, because of its size and perhaps its geopolitical location, is seen as some kind of temperature gauge for the National Elective Conference come December. I mean, what kind of indicators do you reckon there'd be if those discussions don't yield a favorable outcome and we have some kind of collapsing of this conference?
Well, you know, when I got here this morning, there was a sense that this conference could very well be on the verge of collapse, but I don't think so. Now that I've spoken to the national leader, or the leaders of these factions, I should say, who basically say that this decision will ultimately boil down now to national. National, again, having to intervene in the conferences of eThekwini. It just reminds me of back then when the contest was between James Nxumalo and Zandile Gumede. The eThekwini conference collapsed 3 times. And the reason why the stakes are so high for this conference is because, not just because of its geographical and, positioning, and in terms of its numbers, it's a proxy then for the factions at a national level. You have on the Zandile Gumede faction the support literally in the forefront, Dr. Zweli Mkhize, who has been hosting caucuses with Zandile Gumede supporters, as well as suspended ANC Secretary General Ace Magashule, who's also had caucus meetings with Gumede's faction here in Durban ahead of the conference, beginning in yesterday, and as well as Batabile Dlamini on the one side. Thabani Nyawose's faction firmly supporting President Cyril Ramaphosa, and they're very clear that whoever gets elected at the provincial conference in July should be someone who is aligned to the president. So definitely this conference, because eThekwini still is the largest region of the ANC nationally, would set the temperature in the proverbial room, Ayanda, for the provincial conference and the elective conference, which will still be preceded by an NGC. So it's the balance of forces at play here right now.
Ziyanda Ngcobo, thanks very much indeed. Ziyanda's live to us there from inside the Nkosi Albert Luchulu ICC. And if yesterday's developments are anything to go by, there's another long day ahead. Let's